Hey everyone. Today we're going to be going over an interview with Tancred Dyke Wells, the creative director of Battalion Wars, and I'm expecting some really cool things. First, let's start off with Tancred's message on page 1. Hi, first of all, I wanted to say thanks to all the Battalion Wars fan community who are keeping the game alive and showing such love and enthusiasm for this project we made over 15 years ago. I never expected that the game would still have such a dedicated audience after all this time. I love seeing the creativity that goes into your involvement with it. The 3D printed models, the fan art, the tournaments, all that cool stuff. I passed on the information about the 3D printable models to our former producers at Nintendo, and they were really pleased and surprised. It's a privilege to be interviewed by you all. Alright, now let's see here. Page 2. Oh, it's just the index. So we got part 1, Fan Battalion questions, which is the guy who made the interview. We have fan community questions, so I'm guessing that's everyone else's question. Credits and images shared by Tancred. So that could be pretty interesting. So let's get into it. Page 3. Part 1, Fan Battalion questions. Introductory question. By the way of introduction, could you tell us about your career in the world of video games, and more specifically the role you played in the development of Battalion Wars? I've been working in video games professionally for over 25 years, and I've shipped around 24 titles including an artist, game designer, lead artist, designer, and creative director. Aside from Battalion Wars, I'm probably best known for devising and directing the Art Academy series for Nintendo. I was fortunate enough to be interviewed by Satoru Iwata. That was a real career high for me. I bet. That would be for anyone, I guess. And here's the interview link. I'll probably have something pop up briefly showing the interview. Same with all the other links. These days I have my own indie studio alongside my business/coding partner. We are Cindercone Games, and we're making Skeleton Crew. It's a colorful, fun action title, so please check it out and wishlist us. Yeah, I'll check that out. I'll probably have a link to the video, or even the video right now. They have a twitter.com here. They have a Twitter account. Now let's move on to the next page. Regarding Battalion Wars, it was like every project, very much a group effort with incredibly talented people contributing tremendous work at every level, many of whom have gone on to have stellar careers. But basically, I conceived and directed those games. It started life as an original idea/title, but I'll tell you more about that in the other answers. My work on the project was very wide-ranging. I came up with the core concept of a tactical action game where you could give commands to other units. I wanted to experience an action game with more depth, but at the time I had no idea how over-ambitious it was to try and hyperbize games like this. Back in 2002, I'd just come off making Reign of Fire, game of the Matthew McConaughey Christian Bale vs. Dragons Tanks movie, as lead artist. We were a tiny team. We had been playing the original Battlefield 1942 at lunchtimes, which was a revelation at the time, perhaps the first networked FPS with multi-occupant vehicles. It was super exciting. Somehow I liked the idea of an action game in which you could not only run and gun, but also issue commands to NPC allies, something with a little more depth. Little did I know we were biting off how much we were biting off there. Blending genres is a massive ask. There's a reason why game styles tend to pool and distill into distinct types. Mashing a couple together is something to attempt at your peril. The danger of falling between two stools and making something that doesn't live up to the criteria of either genre, action, or tactics is high. Still, all said, I'd like to think we pulled it off and came away with an original tactical action game that was pretty unique and still stands up as fun today. Definitely stands up as fun today. Can get a little repetitive when you've played it as many years as I have, though. We had an opportunity in downtime to put together a demo. It only took a couple of weeks. I modeled up the soldiers. The other guys on the team made up some vehicles, a cute tank and a flying thing. So our soldiers were basically speaking dragons, flying along the ground in our proprietary tech middleware. PS2 engine, the only skinned / non-segmented characters we could have were dragons. Full Spectrum Warrior, Band of Brothers, and a few other worm's eye view tactical command games were starting to appear, though typically they would offer small, squad of 4 based setups. That was more obviously manageable. Later on, I thought the unique control transfer feature that would also appear as more of the catchy named hot swapping in the Battlefield series, though it didn't stick around. Metal Slug was also a big influence. I'd worked on some 2D platform action games in the past, and that was a really informed art style concept. But you have to remember that this was back in the day before mobile games, really, and no one had blazed that Clash of Clans art style trail, whereby colorful and cartoony meant approachable and mass market. At the time of making, Battalion Wars cartoon style meant kiddie, and it was tough to sell. I was credited as lead designer and art director in Battalion Wars 1, also concept artist, script supervisor. It's kind of embarrassing that I'm in the credits so many times. For the sequel, I think I just listed as creative director. Simpler. I created the concept art for some of the early models for the characters. I designed the Western Frontier and the Exylvanian troops. I wrote the original design document and supervised the design team while working with the lead level designers to review and develop each level. I worked with our script writer to define characters and a story, supervised voice recording sessions, helped to choose / cast actors. I gave direction to the music composer and sound effects designer. Everyone on that team was incredibly passionate and skilled, and it's no surprise to me that many of the level designers, coders, musicians, and artists went on to work on and create high-level projects for their careers afterwards. But I have to admit that I stretched myself like never before or since on this project. I had to keep all those aspects of art and design in my mind at all times to cover all the bases at once. I was fried mentally, but I loved it. Yeah, that's great that you loved it. Question 1. How did the idea of creating a universe other than the real world come about and separate yourself from the idea of literally copying the world of Advance Wars? This is not widely known, but Battalion Wars actually began life as an original concept called Versus. Being fairly young at the time, I was very much into first-person shooters and action games. I didn't really like the disassociation and indirect click-and-drag feel of RTS games. I liked high simulation, fast reaction-based, skill-based games. I wanted to experience something like that with more depth. I just came up with the idea of an action game where you could issue commands to other units where you had the ability to take direct control of any unit at any time. I had little idea what a crazy proposal this was at the time. As I had mentioned, ironically, the Battlefield franchise later adopted some of the features, but Battlefield 2 Modern Combat allowed players to hot swap between soldiers. Though this feature was not retained and the map in first meetings to make the game, script, etc., do you remember any idea different from what we know from Battalion Wars? As mentioned, the concept was originally called Versus, which neatly and years later ended up being part of the Japanese title for Battalion Wars 2, Totsugeki Famicom Wars Versus. Anyway, Versus, as I originally conceived, was set in its own universe. The scenario was a lot more humanity versus the undead ghosts of war situation. Basically, all the soldiers and victims of war were rising from the grave to avenge themselves on living humanity, so it was an anti-war war game. That's kind of funny. There were just two factions, humans versus undead soldiers, from every period of history. We did some nice concept art for the version of events. Richard Evans, in particular, did some great work designing vehicles, monstrous troops, and in fact the Exylvanian faction are a kind of remnant of this idea, being vampiric and having World War I gas masks, undead-looking eyes, and so on. We built a basic prototype of the idea using the in-house engine technology we had built for Reign of Fire on the PS2 and Xbox. In that game, we only had skinned the only skinned characters were dragons, so the troops we had running around in that original demo, a version of which was shown at E3 2004 as Advanced Wars Under Fire, were basically dragons that we forced to move at the ground level. Interesting. In the earliest versions of the game, commanding worked differently, more like Pikmin with a reticule would expand outward around the player crosshair or the player. And the units it encompasses would be selected and made available to command. So the artwork and the environment of the demo at this time were actually predated the game's association with the Advanced Wars series. Once we partnered with Nintendo to develop the project and became associated with the Advanced Wars series, it was intentionally decided to call the game Advanced Wars Under Fire to indicate the action-oriented nature of the experience. But on balance, it was decided to separate the game more distinctly to give it its own identity, though in Japan the Famicom Wars association was retained more directly. The Battalion Wars name came after long deliberation and derived, as I recall, from a suggestion from our American producer, Brett Gao of NOA, who had a brother in the Stryker Battalion in Iraq. Question 3. One looks back in time and realizes the impressive evolution of video games. For you, in 2022, what do you think makes Battalion Wars a unique game, and what do you think are its greatest virtues? It's really that we are foolish enough to try and hyperbolize genres. We kind of gave ourselves a cursed game design problem to solve in that respect. That is, how do you make an action game that's also strategic or at least tactical at some level? And how do you allow the players to have situational awareness of all their units when they are always one of those units themselves? But a great thing, I think, was player empowerment. You just have so much freedom and control in the Battalion Wars games. It's what marks them out from other action experiences. You get to feel powerful by issuing commands, but also get the satisfaction of actually pulling the trigger and doing the driving yourself. Besides which, I think we were successful in unifying the aesthetic of the game. The heavy, chunky vehicles, the cartoony troops, the toy-like physics, the stirring music, and the heavy-duty sound effects all just synthesized successfully to give a really charming, consistent feeling. Question 4. What do you like to do the most, or what do you enjoy the most as a developer of Battalion Wars? My problem as a game developer, I think, well, one of the artists on Battalion Wars accused me of always wanting to make the whole game myself. And it's true, on Skeleton Crew right now, for example, I'm doing visual effects, character design, and animation, combat design, level design, boss fights, environmental art, and even some sound effects, basically. I love all of it, and I can't keep my hands off. The one thing I can't do, aside from programming, is music. But even then, I love to work with the composer to find the right sound for the game. I think I'm probably quite annoying to work with for this reason. That's funny. Question 5. We see in the first game of the saga that there are 5 nations: Exylvania, Iron Legion, Western Frontier, Tundra, Solar Empire. When the second part, We, began to be made, were there more nations thought, or just the Anglo Isles? It's hard to recall, but we definitely looked at other nations as possibilities. Obviously, each of the Battalion Wars nations has a real-world counterpart, and I think the same is true with the new ones proposed. An Indian-style faction was one option. I think the one thing Nintendo and we also ended up being concerned to avoid was any kind of race war overtones, though. Being British, we were very keen to add the Anglo Isles faction, but I remember Nintendo felt concerned that they wouldn't be much different from the Western Frontier. We also looked at maybe doing some French-style faction. I think David Swan did some great concept art. You might not know this, but the copper kettle styling of the Anglo Isles is meant to refer to traditional tea urns that were a feature of the British workplace during wartime and earlier. Question 6. What is your favorite nation? It's the Exylvanians. If you look at the skeleton crew we're making right now, it's got the same cute gothic horror vibe going on. And I think I was just really happy with the designs. Gavin Rothery, sorry if I'm screwing up your name, who is now a movie director, check out his new sci-fi film, Archive, did an incredible job with getting that chunky toy-like appeal for the Western Frontier vehicles. We had great fun referencing all those iconic US military tanks, jeeps, and aircraft. But they were also just a perfect counterpart for the harsher look that Daug Telford came up with for Exylvania units. And I really was happy with the troop concepts I produced. Dave Swan designed the Exylvanian COs, and I am most fond of those characters. Question 7. What is your favorite character? Kaiser Vlad. I just thought he really worked as a character, and Wolf Calder, who also appears in Raiders of the Lost Ark, just turned into a masterful voice performance for him. I am super sorry if I'm screwing up names. I am horrible with names. Question 8. Do you have a favorite campaign mission or moment from the game? Titans of Tundra. The Iron 8 was always my favorite BW1 mission. BW1 mission to playtest. I really liked the open world sandbox feel of it, as well as the focus on heavy tanks. I just like the approach I just like that you could approach it with a great deal of freedom and tackle objectives in many different ways. I wish we had made more levels like this, to be honest. So, I kind of get why in Battalion Wars 2, the concept kind of shifted off of levels like this, because it's more singularly unit important in Battalion Wars 2, because if you go to the last mission of Battalion Wars 2, you can really start to notice, hey, I have 4 heavy tanks, I have a battle station, I have 2 anti-air units with 6 anti-air troops, 5 gunships. It's just kind of, you start to kind of understand why battalions were much smaller in Battalion Wars 2. The importance of a single unit was far greater, kind of thing. Even though I think the balancing could have been done a little bit better for Battalion Wars, I feel as though they tried to make the game a little too easy, and Battalion Wars 1 just kind of had the right amount of hardness. Question 9. Was there much difference in difficulty when making the game between Nintendo consoles, GameCube and Wii? Well, we made it complicated for ourselves because we raised our ambition and rewrote so many systems. The AI was totally overhauled, and that had a big cost in development time. And of course, we added network multiplayer, which is just a major challenge. We've been going through that experience on Skeleton Crew recently. We wanted to add BIMP and gloss mapping to the vehicle shaders and remake the artwork higher res. It was all pretty ambitious, but obviously the major change was switching over to the use of Wii Remote for aiming and commanding. Question 10. In an interview we found through Google of yours, we were surprised that Kuju thought of multiplayer for Battalion Wars 1 GameCube. Out of curiosity, what was it like? Was it very different from what we see in multiplayer Wii, or was it different? Well, we basically had split-screen multiplayer up and running on the GameCube. It's true, but there was basically so little screen real estate for each player. With such a complex game and so much that needs to be conveyed by the UI on a relatively low-res display, we opted not to include it in the end. We really had our hands full just making a single-player game. Question 11. I personally have no knowledge of programming or video game design. Out of curiosity, what was the biggest obstacle or difficulty in making any aspect of the game? Example, units follow the player, or the float of ships, flight height of air units. I'm not a coder either, but first of all, I would like to say that the sheer quantity of units on such an early console was a little nuts. So we had to run the level with a level of detail optimization on all aspects of their behavior. I mean, at a distance, not only would we start swapping in lower detail models, but also their AI, their pathfinding, their physics, and their animation would all update less frequency or otherwise be simplified. I think it also might be possible sometimes to see the tanks bounce when they get close enough to the camera that their physics turn on. Question 12. What about the character of Empress Leiko? In Battalion Wars 1, we saw that she picked up a teapot with magic, and she faced Countess Ingrid, dominated by the spirit of Lord Ferroc. Why does she have magic? Was magic going to be a more important element of future installments? I'll be honest, it was really hard to remember, but the whole sequence essentially pays homage to a certain much-loved fantasy trilogy: the Iron Tower, the orc-like Iron Legion troops, Lord Ferroc with his totemic staff, which was the key artifact that can dominate the world. So Leiko references some sort of wizardish magic using characters from a famous fantasy series, but we also just conceived of her as a very spiritual being from an earlier time. Question 13. Regarding the recording of the voice of the characters, must be very unique moments and different from what is programming, design, etc. What is your favorite moment on the voice recordings? I think meeting the cast for the first time was really fun. You'd have to go and look them up, but it was really funny how many of them physically resembled the characters that they were playing. Carrie Shale was probably the exception to that, and he had several roles. Dai Tabuchi was hilarious as Admiral Akira. He really gave it everything when performing. I really liked Admiral Akira. I heard a lot of people found his voice annoying. I did not. I didn't mind him at all. I thought he was one of the more interesting voices in the game, and in fact, I wish he had not died in the Anglo campaign. But you always gotta have that one death in the Battalion Wars games, it seems. But I was most in awe of Wolf Kyler. I am going to pronounce like 6 different variations of this name, and I'm going to screw them all up, I'm 100% sure, so I'm sorry in advance. Giving directions to one of the guys who had their heads melt at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark was very humbling. Besides, he was always so professional and gentle and a pleasure to work with. Question 14. How was the selection of voice actors/actresses? Was there any idea for what the voices should be for each character? We had a lot of auditions to choose from, with sample dialogue that had been sent from our actors for our actors to read from. Myself and the writer were making decisions based on the audio files we received rather than meeting the actors in person until the actual recording sections. But it was actually pretty easy to pick people who just seemed to hit the right tone for each character. General Herman was just an immediate hit. For example, I can't imagine anyone other than Stefan Ashton Frank playing him. He was quite the Herman vibe in person. Some people say the character was influenced by the idea of General Stormin Norman Schwarzkopf crossed with Danny DeVito, but I think we would be unable to confirm or deny that. That's kind of funny. Question 15. Regarding the Battalion Wars soundtrack, which is amazing, and also the number of pieces that were made dedicated to each of the nations and moments in the game, is just something impressive. How was the collaboration with Nick Ardrenal and Justin Scarvona in development of the soundtrack? Did you have any meeting dedicated to finding the musical style regarding the game and each of the nations? They were both an absolute pleasure to work with, and of course we spent time at the outset finding the right mood for each main theme in particular, but I would have to say this was one of those aspects of the game which just flowed really easily with no struggle from my point of view. They responded to the brief really well and just seemed to hit the right note from the outset. Nick went on to do great work with the Arkham series of the Batman games, and Justin is just in general an industry legend. The main intro music from the original Battlefield 1942 was one reference point. It's just so stirring We'd all get soaked up in the lunch times listening to this as the game loaded up, and I would think we have to have some sort of some of that mood with the Battalion Wars theme. But I think the slightly mournful, wistful sound of the mission select music is the one track that really stays with me, which I could listen to again and again. Question 16. I know it's been a long time, but do you remember any funniest or curious stories about the development of Battalion Wars? This is kind of an impossible answer. The whole development period of both Battalion Wars 1 and 2 was just a frantic blur of activity and non-stop switching attention between different aspects of the game. Question 17. Making a game should be a unique experience that also creates good relationships and experiences and an atmosphere. Are you still in contact with your old colleagues from the saga? Yeah, pretty much all of them. I still work with some of them. Lewis Ho, who is a brilliant level designer on both games, has been working with us to make Skeleton Crew, and we were going to have a big reunion meetup, but when COVID hit, so we needed to reorganize that. You know, a lot of people who have worked on the game have gone on to have really amazing careers and done great work. I'll give you a few examples. Ted Timmons, who fans should know as the designer of the Private Hazard Minefield mission, is now Senior Creative Director at Raven Software working on Call of Duty. Devade Solone, I believe? I'm sorry if I'm screwing up your name. Who is also the level designer on the first game, super lovely guy, who was just so excited to be working on a Nintendo title. He's the guy who went on to design Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle, who is now the creative director of Ubisoft Milan. You might know him from the moment when Miyamoto acknowledged his work and he couldn't hold back the tears.
When I met Davide-san, I had just one condition for this project. I said, whatever you do, don't try to make...
Ron Ashtani, lead artist who went on to found an art agency, adamhawk.com, who provided the concept art for the Marvel movies, Harry Potter, and more. He recently set up a new creative agency, Big Thursday. My friend Gavin Rothery, who designed all of the Western Frontier and Tundran vehicles, worked essentially as co-creator of the sci-fi movie Moon and now the director of Archive, which I highly recommend now on Netflix. Jonathan Burrows, level designer, went on to co-found Variable State, who made Virginia and Laugh Stop. Steve Stanton, level designer, Toby Woolley, level designer, Benyat Macon, level designer, and Mark Statler all went on to work at Ninja Theory in various senior roles. Nick Ardrunal, composer, went on to work at Rocksteady and composed the amazing score for the Arkham series. Jamie Whitworth, level designer, who worked at Rocksteady on the original Arkham Asylum, creating the memorable Scarecrow encounter, has gone on to be a creative director at Electronic Arts, or EA. Andy Trowers, lead designer, went on to work as a game director at Zo Mode before running a backpedaler hostel in Cambodia and is now a senior product manager at FitXR. Paul Mackman, writer and producer, went on to become COO of Axis Studios and is now managing director of Trailer Production Unit. I don't know what that is, but sounds cool. Plus, there are a bunch of guys who went on to do great things at Ninja Theory, Rockstar, and many more. Google the names from the credits if you were interested. Question 18. As the years passed after the release of Battalion Wars 2 on the Wii, in 2007, are you surprised that there is an entire community alive for this series in 2022? Honestly, it's extraordinary, and it feels like such a privilege. It gives me hope for the future, and I really think it just shows that if you put your heart into a creative project, you will find its audience in time. Question 19. During these years, do you closely follow the content made by Battalion Wars fans, projects, mods, guides, online games? To be honest, not closely at all during this period since the game was released. It's only relatively recently that I've become more aware of what's going on. It was a huge surprise to hear about how big the Discord is, to be honest. And I know it's the same for many other developers, but I think it's amazing to see what the community is doing. The 3D models, the tournaments, modding, everything. Question 20. I think many fans, myself included, are wondering the following. Is it possible we will see a Battalion Wars 3 in the future? Has there been any proposal or contact to Nintendo about, or if they have talked internally? So yes, of course there was a Battalion Wars 3 proposal at the time. In fact, that was for the Wii U, and I still have the pitch deck somewhere, I think. I'm afraid it's not something I can really share with you, but you can imagine the potential of the map screen on the Wii U with the tablet of the main game, and the TV was really cool. We really wanted to develop a map screen commanding features and look for the asymmetrical gameplay options. Unfortunately, it wasn't commissioned, but please keep on asking Nintendo if you want to see it happen. I've actually heard about this little presentation that they made, or whatever it is, the pitch deck, and how it would work on the Wii U. But I definitely wish they would add some sort of level editor for the Wii U, because I think it would work very well with the Wii U. You could edit the levels and stuff, and like have some basic tools like Mario Maker kind of thing going on. That would have been really cool on the Wii U, honestly. And we would have gotten an HD Battalion Wars, and so I don't know if they would have updated the engine or not. Question 21. In a hypothetical situation that Battalion Wars 3 is made, during its development, would there be any kind of survey or compilation of ideas from the fan community? For sure. I think it would take a push from the fans to make the game happen, so it'd be smart to ask for your input. Please, level designer, that would be great. Even if it's like offline only, still, if we could share it using some method, that would be amazing. Question 22. We know that there are many video games that include an Easter egg examples, Battlefield or Assassin's Creed. Did Battalion Wars include an Easter egg that no one has discovered yet? I think since the game has been opened up and examined by the mod community, it's unlikely, but there may be references that may have been missed. For example, I can't recall, to be honest, if this made it into the final game, but there was a really long in-engine cutscene where one of our developers put together. He was obsessed with the Goonies, and he wanted to reference the water chute scene with the grunts going down the waterfall in the cavern, but I might have made him take it out, I'm afraid. I have some questions about some Easter egg things if you are watching this, Stand Creed. There is a island in the third Tundran mission up in the corner of the map that looked like it was used for a cutscene, and I'd also love to see that Goonies waterfall cutscene if you could somehow get the file for it and just take a video even. We don't, anything to show us, that would be great. I have some questions about that cutscene as well, the one in the Tundran mission. Final question. When you played this game, were there any missions you got stuck on regarding online? What was your favorite mode? Cooperative, assault, skirmish? Well, I think we'd be constantly reviewing levels for balance and reviving them for difficulty. So I think there would be periods during development when levels were too tough, I think. As regards to the final game, I was able to S rank or at least A rank every mission. Online, I liked co-op, to be honest. Andy Trowers, the lead level designer, and I used to play the other modes a lot, and he's just a super competitive trash talker. So while it was fun to beat him once in a while, the rest of the time he could be a bit annoying. That's funny.
This is the end of part 1. If you like this, check out part 2 where we answer all the community's questions for Tancrete.